Welcome, dear viewer, to Feisty Chess. I've been paired with El Supremo 04 on LeeChess.org in 1510. We are white. We are playing e4 as usual. We've got e5. What to do against this? Let's get feisty today and play some King's Gambit. Haven't ventured the King's Gambit yet, although I do play its cousin, the Vienna game. Let's see how white reacts, how black reacts to this. King's Gambit, not objectively the best opening, but definitely a great way to get your opponent on their heels, maybe in your own turf, right there on move 2. So I have played the King's Gambit in the past, so I know a thing or two about it. And a lot of the same attacking themes are present in the Vienna game, which I think is sounder. Okay, we've really put the question to El Supremo here. He is taking his time. Some of his options are taking, that's the main move, taking on f4. He could also decline with, say, bishop to c4, in which case I do not want to take on e5, where I'm looking at queen h4 check. Or he can play the counter gambit actively against it with d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit. I'm a fan of the Falkbeer. I think that's the way to play against someone who wants to play a King's Gambit, who wants to get an attacking position, a rowdy game against you. The Falkbeer is psychologically harder for a King's Gambit player to handle. Most King's Gambit players want you to play e takes f4, as he's done right here. So I can play the main move with knight to f3. There's also the bishop's gambit with bishop to c4. I'm feeling extra feisty. Let's do the bishop's gambit. What this does is allow queen h4 check, which is likely going to be played here, and I slide my king to f1. If anyone's familiar with Adolf Anderson's Immortal Game, this is the opening that begins with. If you're not familiar with the Immortal Game, it's fantastic. Maybe I should do a video on that game alone. Played in 1851, Anderson Kieseritzky. It was played at a bar outside of the London tournament in 1851, which was quite the event, but this was a casual game played outside of the bounds of the tournament. It's unclear how much of a game it really is, but as a game it's fantastic. So I'm expecting queen h4 check. El Supremo has been thrown off by both of my last two moves. That's good. That's a little bit of a psychological victory, and it's also taking its toll on the clock. So we find ourselves in the unusual position of 2-minute advantage right out of the gate. I understand, I don't know the theory here, but I understand that bishop c4 has been a little bit resuscitated of late. Okay. Now, which way to take here? Probably taking with the bishop is good, so I'm not blocking in my bishop, and my pieces, both my bishop and my pawn, are protected then. He's giving the pawn back. Yeah, I'm happy with bishop. Bishop takes. I'm not going to think too much about that. Bishop seems a little bit loose on c4, especially since black can come to the 4th rank with tempo, with queen h4. I was looking at, say if I took with the pawn, it would have been queen h4, king f1, followed by f3 perhaps, attacking my bishop along the 4th rank. And then I have to deal with that bishop and deal with the threat of f takes g2 check. And my king is just really open there. So I don't know these lines that well, but I'm pretty sure I needed to play bishop takes. If he goes for c6, probably just... Okay. Okay, he wants to take the queens off the board. I don't like this. For him, he's left b2 and his a8 b7 and his a8 rook basically hanging here. I might even consider... No, that's not worth considering. I was looking at queen takes bishop here. But that line ends with his black queen coming to d1 mate. So I could force a trade of queens because he needs to do something about my bishop hitting b2, b7. I could also force a trade of that bishop by bringing my knight to f3. That doesn't quite force a trade of the bishop. But either that or bringing the queens off the board. So I'm looking at queen e1 or knight f3 here. Knight f3, can he just play c6? I suppose he can. Queen e1 forces a trade of queens. I'm happy with that in this position. The material's equal, and I won't be able to castle, but once the queens are off the board, that's not a big deal. And the reason this forces a trade of queens is he has to do something about this, so he has to take my queen just to gain a tempo. So let's go queen d1, queen e1. I'm expecting him to take. Okay. Now c6, maybe knight c6. If knight c6, I would even consider bishop takes that knight immediately. Just kind of wrecking his pawn structure there. He does have the two bishops, but he's got a lot of targets. Okay, c4 or b3. b3 is probably best. I like the look of knight to c3 and following up maybe with e5. Although d3 would hit that pawn. d3, and he plays maybe g4, g5, and then h4, and he can't protect all those pawns. So actually d3 looks very solid and inviting. d3, maybe bishop d6 to hold on to that pawn. Then I've got knight e2, and we're looking at the same stuff unless he wants to give me the bishop pair. So yeah, d3 looks good. Yeah, we'll just build a solid pawn center. He has no central pawns, so my pawn center will be a presence this game. I think he's got to go bishop d6, and then I'll play knight e2. Knight e2 does allow him to push f3. Maybe I'll tickle that bishop with h3 first. h3, bishop h5. There's also knight h3 here. Knight h3 is also met by f3. Maybe our knight really belongs on f3. If I go king f2, remember I can't castle. If I go king f2, that invites bishop check on c4, c5. Okay, let's just get our knight to f3. That can't be bad. Alright, I like the look of rook f1. Okay, wait, now I've got knight c3 to e2. Now that is an idea. Develops a piece, and I'm planning to go to e2 to attack that f4 pawn again. Once my knight's on e2, I can also think about getting my king to f2. Maybe. Okay, he castles. Open up that h-file against his king. Let's make him do something here about the f4 pawn. He has knight h4 as another alternative. I also have ideas of bishop d2 and just putting the bishop on c3. The bishops look pretty good on those adjacent diagonals. I have to continually remind myself that I cannot castle. It's deceptive in a position like this. This position actually reminds me, I was mentioning it earlier, it reminds me of the Falkbeer counter Gambit, where a lot of times black will give up a d-pawn, and white will end up with a good sized center, but black will have this thorny pawn on f4 that he's able to hang on to. Yeah, here we go. Okay, this takes the pressure off my center. I could expand with d4. If d4, then I would be able to play king f2. Maybe rook to f1 is good here. Just piling up more pressure on that pawn. But he's going to have time to play h5 and g6. h6 and g5. So maybe it's time to just expand in the center instead. Yeah, let's go for this. It really shuts down his knight. I can play c3 to bolster that, and this rules out knight back to f6. So I like the looks of this. And I'm threatening here just to play e5 and then win this pawn. I guess that's kind of the main point, although that wasn't even my thought process to begin with. Okay. Yeah, e5 looks really strong here. I don't think he has any good ways to give up a piece. e5, bishop takes f3, g takes f3. If he's got a bishop check, I can always block it with tempo. And I still have my knight and my bishop on that. His f5 break is impossible now due to this pin. So let's play e5. Cutting the bishop off from the defense of that f4 pawn. The counter gambit he played against my bishop's gambit is probably named and known. e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, bishop c4, d5. There's probably a name for that line. I'm looking forward to learning about that. A good friend of mine is a King's Gambit fan, so this one's for you, Clark, assuming I win it. Relatively close on time. I enjoy a good queenless middle game. I wouldn't call this an end game by any stretch. Virtually every piece is on the board except the queen. We've only traded queens and one pair of pawns. So this, in my book, is a middle game. Okay, so taking with the knight or the bishop. I like taking with the knight. Preserves the bishop pair and is more likely to lead to yeah, I'm going to take with a knight. What do I need to consider here? I'm going to keep that bishop pair. That'd be a nice piece of compensation for him if I go up a pawn, which I am going up a pawn. Still can't castle. Do not let myself forget that. Okay, we're trading. Okay, he's trying to undermine my center. Seems natural to play c3 here. Seems more or less necessary. Can probably get a rook to d1. I'm liking the look of my king on f2. Although that does subject me to pins. There might be pins wherever I go. That pawn can be pinned by the bishop on f2, so that's worth noting. But with the king on f2, that pawn may be pinned, but if he tries to remove a defender, okay, we'll recapture with a pawn. Say bishop c5 here. If he at some point tries to remove a defender with bishop takes f3, I can recapture with the king, presumably, and then I still have a defender on this pawn. But I would need to get a rook on d1 to give an extra defender to the d4 pawn at this point. So if he goes bishop b6, I think rook d1 is the best idea. Okay. He's got his eyes on the e4 square, it looks like. How do we thwart that? Maybe h6? Knight e4 right now does run into bishop d5, it seems. I'm going to go h6, just put a question to the bishop. I cannot castle. Well, he goes for it. So now his knight is kept out of e4. And I could just move my king to say d2 at some moment, and I would be attacking that knight. His knight could counter by moving to h5, but once I go bishop h2, his knight is pretty stuck. Okay, what's the idea here? He's wanting to release that pin. I like the king on f2 here. This threatens the knight. Connects the rooks. And now I don't have to keep my bishop on this diagonal necessarily. I can say put it here, and my king covers g3, so his knight is still stuck. And also, this covers my d4 pawn. And also continues to watch over g5. If he should want to push g5 and make an outpost on f4 for his knight. Okay, f6. That's very committal. All right, I see the idea here. Maybe I can gain time on his bishop here. Get a rook into the game. Yeah, that looks good. Make the bishop move while d6 is still off limits. I'm thinking about a e6 push. I don't see anything stopping me from going d5 after e6 as well. He could play a knight or a bishop to g3 once I make that push, but I don't think there's much to worry about there. f4 doesn't work really as a way of bolstering this, because after takes, I have to take with this pawn, then I'm pinned, and then he's got knight takes f4. I'm going to go ahead and push. This pawn looks pretty dangerous. I'm not worried about a bishop check on g3. Okay. I'm not worried about his bishop being there either. I could take. After knight takes, I've got rook c7. We're getting into a rook-type endgame. I have these huge passers here. Let's just get them rolling. Now I can play something like bishop a4, hitting that rook. Could also just bring this other rook here to d1 and then push to d6. I don't think he gained anything by bishop f4. Yeah. Yeah, so now I king g2 or e2? g2 looks good. My bishop is unprotected. Okay. Am I worried about bishop takes b2? I don't think so. I can get a rook to c7 if he does that. That's got to be bad for him. Let's just continue with our plan. If he goes for the knight check, I'll just take it with my bishop. Okay, he goes for this. I might be able to sacrifice the exchange here. I've got the two bishops as compensation, and look at those pawns. Those monsters. Is it time to just push? If I go rook here, rook c2, he's got bishop d4. And I can still push. I can still push. So I don't need to go too gung-ho and give up the exchange right now. He doesn't have anything that gains a tempo on me, So if he goes back to, I'm sorry, if he goes back to e5, I think I said d4 earlier. Yeah, this super bishop is, man, these pawns. I'm very happy black took on f3 with this bishop. I was worried, I mean, knight e4 would have been some nice counterplay for him. But that allowed me to cover e4 in one fell swoop. I'm just thinking back several moves. I don't see anything better than bishop d4 here. Sorry, e5. e5. Okay. And let's not waste time. Let's just get those pawns on the 6th rank. They've got to be unstoppable. They're menaces. I'm not even concerned with, say, bishop takes a7. That wins a pawn, but not really, because he's got knight f4 check. The plan here is very clear. I'm threatening to push either one of these bad boys. Yeah, d7 looks like a huge threat here. The rook can't blockade on d8 because there's e7, forking those rooks. He might have to just give up the bishop here and now. It's probably what he's considering. Okay. This can't be good for him. Now the question is, do I go e7 or d7? e7... Oof. e7 just traps the rook. I'm winning the exchange. d7 might be even better, however, because he can't go rook e8, because I got a rook behind my d-pawn. Sorry, he can't go rook e7. d7, rook d8 again runs into e7, and rook e7. Frankly, any rook move runs into e7, and rook e7 runs into d8 queen, so this should win, d7. Very thematic King's Gambit win here with the central pawn mass just really showing its full force. Speaking a little too soon, I mean, this game is not over, and I've been known to blunder in this kind of semi-tight time situation. Don't want to eat my words later. I'm glad my king is on g2 rather than e2, so there's no pins that might complicate my pawn roller. Okay, giving up a rook. Let's just take the rook. There might have been something better, but I'm not about to get too picky with these kind of things. I'd like to get this. I'd like to double my rooks. Let's start with this. We're threatening e7. We're keeping his king off the 7th rank. I mean, we're also looking at b7, but not sure that's all that relevant right now. Okay, e7. Looks like a win. a5, a4 is not quick enough. Let's see. That does allow king g7, but he can't step any closer to the pawn, so this threatens rook to d8. Mm-hmm. Might be time to swallow our pride and just grab some pawns and find what win we can. Actually, I'm threatening bishop a4 here. That should be enough. Okay. Bishop a4. All right. Thank you for the game, El Supremo 4. Let's look at it. So my first venturing of the King's Gambit is a success. I do like the kinds of games that arise from the King's Gambit. d5. Let's get out the analysis board here. d5. Okay, you'll see the main move here is knight f3, but actually the only other popular move is bishop c4, and they actually score almost identically, interestingly, despite bishop c4 allowing queen h4 check. The downside to that, it displaces my king and I can no longer castle, but I'm going to get knight f3 in with some tempo on the queen. d5. Bledow variation. This is new. I've never heard of this. So bishop takes d5. Looks like both moves are possible at the top level. I went with bishop takes d5. I think that was the right practical choice. Seemed more solid. Now knight f6 makes sense because you want the bishop pair and that pawn back. If knight f6, looks like knight c3 is a good idea. Developing and protecting. But here's where queen h4 came in, then king f1. Bishop g4. That gives me a good advantage. Actually, the computer likes black here. That extra pawn weighs heavily on the computer's mind. But notice this, once the bishop g4 gets played, it doesn't like so much. So the computer wants knight f3. Queen e1 is more equal. So I could have had an advantage with knight f3. See, the line is knight f3, knight d7, bishop takes b7. Okay. What about if knight f3, c6? Oh, bishop takes f7. Interesting. Okay, bishop takes f7. This is a common tactic in King's Gambits, and a lot of systems where the bishop comes to c4. Now we're going to win back that pawn with our knight guarding our queen. So that's just extra pawn for white here. Since black has already given back his pawn with the Blood-Owl variation, d5. Instead, queen e1 is not so testing for black. c6, bishop b3, following computer's recommendations here, knight f6. The computer likes knight d3. Once again, I've had a bit of an advantage with knight c3, sorry. Knight c3, knight to d7, and then knight g to e2. Bishop takes e2. Interesting. That it would give up the bishop pair without having to. d3, still fine. Bishop d6. It still likes knight e2. Here's the line I was concerned with, though. Knight e2. It says a5, threatening to trap the bishop. I guess that makes some sense. I was concerned with f3. So black is liquidating this awkward pawn. G takes f3. I guess this allows me to get my rook into the game, though. And put a little pressure on f7 indirectly. Yeah, white's got the big unchallenged center, the bishop pair, and the centralized king might not be a disadvantage in the end. Oh wait, there's more. Bishop takes h2. So black does stay up a pawn, and those look like dangerous passers on that side of the board, but knight to c3. Huh. The center apparently accounts for a lot here. Knight d7, and then d4. And with this, we're threatening e5, making the knight move, probably knight d5, and then we can take and gain a pawn back, and we still got a central majority. I don't know, in an endgame like this, I'm not as convinced by the central majority. When you've got these distant passers on the king side. Anyway, yeah, maybe I was rightly afraid of that line. Although the computer seems to think white has a big plus. It's probably hard to demonstrate over the board. So we're hovering around even here. The computer really likes this idea of a5 expanding on the queen side and threatening to trap the bishop on b3. With, say, a4 and then bishop c4, b5. Okay, it likes a draw here. Still with the idea of a5. I was happy I found this plan, this central expansion. And the knight on e2 actually makes this a threat, so that pawn is not pinned. Bishop c7, knight takes f4. It's starting to like white. I've gained that pawn back, but I've gained a pawn on black. But it's still only counting as half a pawn. Probably because the awkwardness of my king and the activity of the black rook. Okay, it's starting to count for more now once I get c3 in. What does it recommend here for black? King h8. Probably going for f6 as soon as possible. So c5 and c3 got thrown in. Now I have two passers. And that makes a big difference for the evaluation. It likes bishop b6, putting pressure on that d pawn. I'd have to go rook d1, and then bishop e6. And that just encouraged d5. Let's look at this line. Rook d1, bishop e6, and then can I just play d5 with tempo? I can. Bishop f5. Struggling to get this other rook activated. The idea with h3 might be to play a later g4 and then activate this rook on the second rank. And then sliding my king over to f1 maybe to break this pin on that pawn if that's important. Okay, as the game went, h3, and I think the computer's not going to like this move. And not just for the bishop pair, but for the control of e4. I don't think... Yeah, it gives me a big advantage now. That basically gives me a pawn worth of evaluation. Bishop e6 to try to blockade those pawns. Makes sense. But right now, yeah, I'm guessing my advantage stays pretty healthy like this throughout. Does like bishop e3, f6, rook h to c1. Why went rook a to c1? It's hard to know why the computer likes rook h to c1 better. I'd imagine my other rook would support one of my central pawns. So why bring the king's rook all the way over to c1? Oh, to sack the exchange. Let's look at this line. Rook h c1. And then protecting with a rook. Now it likes e6, but the line it was looking at was rook takes here and e6 and these two bishops. Yeah, this is an interesting material imbalance. Two bishops and a rook, I've been told, are more or less equal with two rooks and a knight. And in this position, it's probably better than equal because that knight is a very sad piece on the edge of the board with no viable squares currently. And that's not even taking into account my monster central pawns. So, yeah, sacking the exchange was probably sound at the time that I considered it as well. I went rook h to c1. Basically got another piece into the game at no cost in terms of time. Now e6, the computer likes that. Yeah, bishop f4. If he had gone knight g3, I was just planning, yeah, rook h to d1. And then putting his knight on f5. That's a good blockading piece on these two squares. But after d5, I'm going to get my bishop to c5. So he takes, we'll follow the line here, the computer line, knight g3, knight f5, d5, knight takes e3, and then takes. Then bishop d6 tries to blockade. And actually this would be a tricky one for me to try to win. I'm up a pawn, and I've got those two monster passers, but he's got a really good dark square blockade because I don't have a dark square bishop. So I'd have to do some planning here. King d4, allowing a skewer on my b-pawn. Rook e7 just to establish that blockade more firmly. h4, rook to e1, king g7, rook to c2. Not sure what the plan is there. Yeah, that would have been a better plan to try to get his knight to f5. This made things too easy on me. Bishop takes f4, or sorry, bishop f4, and I can just play d5 right away. Although it likes bishop takes f4, knight takes f4, d5 better. Because the bishop can still get back to try to blockade. Look at that, it allows this fork. The line the computer likes. Take, take. And just push d5 and allow this fork. King e3. My king steps a bit closer, and his knight has left the game, and I get another rook into the game. So technically he has a material advantage, but it's overwhelming for white here, because I'm going to play d6. I can get a rook onto the c-file. Yeah, it's too much. If he tries to stop me from playing d6, I have e7. And then if he tries to pin, then I got rook c7. Okay. B6, and king D4. And then we're planning bishop A4, similar to the game. So yeah, losing the exchange is just still winning. Okay. Yeah, the computer likes king E2, but I'm glad I went to G2. Rook HD1 as I played, and then bishop takes B2, rook C7. I suppose that's a more powerful plan immediately, because I can't get to C7 once the bishop comes back to E5. I keep referring to E5 as D4. I need to work on this stuff. D6, yeah, and the advantage is just huge at this point. Yeah, we won one rook. We're about to win a second. And call it good. All right, another good one. Feeling better about my chess lately. Some of these old-fashioned openings I used to like to play, King's Gambit and French Defense, they are still fun toys to play with, and I'm having a good time. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. Thanks for watching if you have, and I'll catch you next time. Stay feisty.